Hello everybody, welcome to another video with me, Charlie Lambden. This is Moving Home with Charlie, and I'm here to share with you the 20-something years of insights that I have picked up from working alongside estate agents who've been my clients for all that time. In this video, I'm going to be discussing the different options available to you if you are moving house and having to sell one home and simultaneously buy another. For those of you moving for the first time, by that I mean selling for the first time and buying the next place, up until now your only experience of dealing with estate agents will have been buying. And as a first time buyer with nothing to sell, it's never easy and you probably had quite a stressful experience, but it is nothing compared to what you are about to go through if you are selling and buying. And in this video, I'm going to be discussing the option of whether or not you should try to simultaneously sell and buy at the same time, so a simultaneous exchange of contracts on both, weighed up against the alternative, which is selling, completing your sale, having somewhere to live temporarily, whether that's moving with family or a short-term let, and then buying as a separate transaction, and the pros and cons of both. I'm not going to advise for or against either one because it's a massively personal choice with a huge number of personal considerations that you have that are unique to you and your situation that I don't know about. But what I will do is talk through what I think the pros and cons of the two options are. You will have a number of factors to consider. Number one, what is your primary reason for moving? Is it because you've changed jobs? Is it because of the ending of a relationship? Is it because of the starting of a new relationship? Is it a forced sale for other reasons? All of these things are things that will affect the decision about whether you want to sell and buy at the same time, or whether you want to sell and then buy. And I'm not talking about speculating on house prices. I'm not talking about selling, waiting for the market to drop and then buying. That's a totally separate thing. I'm assuming that all other things are equal. You need to move from one home into another home. So if you haven't already seen it, I would recommend that you check out the video I've done, which is advice for first-time sellers, which is just about the process of understanding what goes into the sale of a property, whatever your reasons for selling are. What typically happens in a typical move, and we're talking only about home movers here, of course, right? People moving out of one home and into another, is that people will try to sell their existing home and buy their new home at the same time. And will always try as much as possible to have a simultaneous exchange and simultaneous completion so that you don't end up falling between two stools, and so you can move out of one house and into your new house on the same day. The problem with that and the risk with that is that you're relying on three parties. There's yourself, there is the buyer of your old home, and there is the seller of your new home. So you've got a transaction involving at least three parties. And what I want to show you on here is, so this is the one, the property on the left is the one that you need to sell. And the property on the right is the one that you need to buy. And this is you. Okay? And you've got over here your buyer. Over here, you've got the seller of your new home. The two approaches to this that are available are the one I've already outlined, which is that you try to sell and buy the two properties simultaneously. When that works out well, it's great. The alternative option is complete the sale of this home first, find somewhere to live temporarily, and then complete the purchase of your new home separately. Now, why would you do that? Sounds like moving twice, sounds like more expense, more uncertainty, more time, more hassle. Well, yes, potentially. There's a law of communications that goes something like this. Okay, if you've got two parties, you've only got two possible directions of communication. From party one to party two, and from party two to party one. It's just two-way communication, okay? And let's just assume that that's the scenario of you and the buyer of your existing house. The moment you put a third person in, right, you've suddenly got, instead of 2 communications directions, you've got 6 communications directions, right? So you have instantly tripled your communications overhead, your communications requirement, the number of conversations that need to happen. You've tripled it. You have got a 300% higher communications overhead to a simultaneous sale and purchase compared to if you do 2 separate purchases, where you'll only ever have 2 concurrent communications directions or overhead. Does that make sense? I hope that's clear, okay? So you've also got far more factors outside your control, because your buyer of your old home may be in a chain. The seller of your new home may or may not be in a chain. And you've got extra mortgages and surveyors and extra conveyances to have involved. And so it is a much, much harder job for you and your estate agent to line everything up for simultaneous exchanges and completions than it is to do one transaction at a time. The risk of doing them as separate transactions is that you end up, for whatever reason, being unable to buy your next home. And you end up falling between 2 stools in no man's land. And that can happen for a number of reasons. Your availability of mortgage might change, availability of finance might change, your credit, you might end up suddenly, for reasons outside your own control, not being able to get the finance together for the new home. That's a very real risk. And you wouldn't want to sell your old home if that was a risk. So you'd need to rule that out, or make sure that that's a risk that you're prepared to accept before considering the option of a separate sale and a separate purchase. Personally, as long as I had ruled out the risk of not being able to financially proceed with the purchase of my second home, there are some advantages, significant advantages to doing them as 2 separate transactions, if you can, if you've got somewhere to live in the meantime. Okay. And by the way, third option of in the meantime is use your funds to buy a nice big mobile Winnebago camper van. I don't know if the family situations allow that or not, but that's something that I know people have done actually. But here we go. These are, and actually I've got a friend somewhere in London who wanted to sell and buy, but couldn't find somewhere to buy and therefore gave up on the sale and now wishes that she hadn't. But if she had taken my suggestion and actually just sold when she could have sold and then went off to buy separately, she would have been able to do that, because it was a 100% cash deal for her. So there's no mortgage or risk of finance changing. As a seller, you're more likely to find a buyer if your buyer doesn't have to wait for you to find somewhere else to live. Does that make sense? So as a seller, you are more attractive, and your property is a more attractive proposition to a buyer if they don't have to wait for you to find a new home. So you will actually get more buyers interested in your home for that logistical reason. And the more buyers you've got interested in your home that you're selling, the higher the price you're likely to get for it, and also the sooner you're likely to get it sold. So you will typically have a much quicker sale of your existing property if you don't have to wait to find a new home, right? Because it's more attractive to especially to first-time buyers and other buyers, that you don't have an onward chain. So with more buyers, higher price in less time, okay? So that means that you might have more money in the bank and be able to go out looking for your new home sooner. Does that make sense? So yes, you've got the logistical hassle of having to move out of the old place, find somewhere to put all of your stuff. Maybe it goes into storage, or maybe you rent somewhere. Maybe you do a 6-month rental. And the trouble with renting is, of course, that it's got to be a minimum of 6 months, and you may not need to wait 6 months. And there are other hassles associated with that. Maybe you've got family you can move in with temporarily. Maybe you can move back in with your parents, or maybe you can share with friends, or maybe there's an informal temporary opportunity for you to go to live in someone's house that you know. That happens quite a lot in real life. I know of situations where that's happened. But You are also now at an advantage when buying the next place because you are an unencumbered buyer. You are a buyer that does not have to wait for the sale of their property to complete. So you're more attractive as a buyer to sellers who are out there. And as a result, when you're a more attractive buyer logistically, it often means that you will secure the new property for less money than someone else. For example, let's say that you, who are now, let's say you're either a cash buyer or you've got your mortgages portable, whatever it might be, you are effectively in a position to proceed immediately financially on the purchase of the next house. And you are offering, let's say 200,000, right? But someone else is offering on the same property, and let's say that they're offering 210,000, 5% more than you. But they haven't sold their property yet. If you are the seller of the new home that you're hoping to buy, sorry, that doesn't make sense. As the seller of a new home, considering those two different options, you've got instantly proceedable buyer at 200,000 or potentially proceedable buyer at 210,000, but we're going to have to wait for them to sell their property and accept the uncertainties of that deal falling through for all the reasons that deals fall through. Okay, so there's a reason why you might actually get the newer home for less money. So in both instances, you're going to potentially, and in my view, on average, more likely to sell your old home for more money in less time, okay, if it doesn't depend on you finding a new place. And you're more likely to find a new home and be able to secure it more quickly for a lower price if you can proceed straight away without having to wait for a sale. Does that make sense? So, although for a lot of people, the thought of moving twice and the risks involved is just actually too great, there are also the risks of trying to do it as a simultaneous transaction where, because you've got three parties involved, your buyer, you, and the seller of your new home, the chances of that deal happening are much, much lower because there are far more things that can go wrong with it. So there are risks to both, okay? There are risks to trying to hold out and make it two simultaneous transactions. So I'm not saying one is better than the other, it's personal choice. What I'm saying is you should consider it because you may end up with a nicer home sooner if you can accept the moving twice hassle and cost of selling your old home first, being somewhere temporary in a position to before you go in to buy the new home. Right, sorry, I got into a bit of a ramble. I don't know if that makes sense. I hope it does. Let's just wrap this up. So let's just say you got a big camper van you can go and put your family in the meantime. And so you sell, moving your camper van to temporary accommodation, and then you buy separately. You sell for more sooner, and you may be able to buy for less more quickly, and you're more likely to have your offer accepted as an unencumbered buyer than you are if you are a buyer that has to have something to sell. Ultimately, it might actually take less time to do two transactions separately, and ultimately you've got a better chance of ending up in a nicer place for less money. Those are the pros and cons, all right? So you've also got to, if you were to do the statistical levels of certainty of each, I think you'll find you have a statistically higher chance of actually getting into a new home by doing it in two separate transactions than by trying to do it in one. Now, you might have an agent locally that says, do you know what, we do this all the time, and your buyer is rock solid and that seller is committed. This is going to be a simultaneous transaction and it's fine. And you should always, as long as it's an agent that you trust, you should always go with that local expertise. But I wanted to do this video to just let sellers, first-time sellers, know who are buying a new home that you do have this option. You don't have to do a simultaneous sale and purchase. I hope that was helpful. I hope it wasn't too much of a ramble. Send me your questions if I've left any questions unanswered there. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you on the next video. Bye-bye, and good luck with your move.